All right, folks, we're going to get started. This is the, I guess, first larger meeting of the America 250 in Connecticut Education Subcommittee. As you, I'm sure, know that this that America 250 is designed to celebrate and or commemorate upcoming events that will take place up to and including 2026. And these are all obviously related to the 250th anniversary of the United States. So we don't have time for everybody to give a massive detail like where you were born and where you went to elementary school. But if everybody could just very briefly introduce yourself, who you are, and perhaps your affiliation. And we'll save like your dog's name or something like that for an upcoming meeting. But Cindy, you want to introduce yourself first?
Sure. So my name is Cindy Tolosa. I am the Development Officer for Connecticut Humanities and the Project Manager for the Connecticut Commission for America 250. And so you will see lots of emails and other communications from me moving forward. And I will pass it on to Ruth.
My name is Ruth Torres. I'm a board member of the Connecticut Humanities Council. I'm Schaghticoke and former trustee at the Institute for American Indian Studies. I presently work part-time in the mayor's office where I live in West Haven.
Thank you. How about Rebecca?
Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Tabor. I'm director of Connecticut History Day. I just came back from the national contest, and I work for the Connecticut Democracy Center at Connecticut's Old State House.
Thank you. Danielle?
Hi, my name is Danielle Johnson, and I am a teacher. Teach 8th grade for Bristol Public Schools, and I also work at the Connecticut Historical Society, and I recently won the Red, White, and Blue School Award and was recognized by the Secretary of State, and that's how I got involved with this, so I'm super excited to be here.
Thank you very much. Sally?
I'm Sally Whipple. I'm the executive director of the Connecticut Democracy Center at Connecticut's Old State House.
Greg?
Hi, Greg Mangan. I work on staff at Connecticut Humanities in charge of online history and education resources.
Richard Hirsch?
Dick Hirsch, former high school teacher of self-studies, professor of education, former president of Trinity College and Hobart William Smith Colleges, and now live in Guilford and I'm on a school board there.
Thank you, Richard. Tracy?
I am Tracy Wilson. I'm a retired high school history teacher in West Hartford, and I'm the town historian for West Hartford and have done some consulting with the State Department of Ed.
Matt?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Matt Warsh. I'm a professor of history at Central Connecticut State University. I'm also serving as the vice president of the Connecticut Council for Social Studies. I co-chaired the Connecticut Civil War Commemoration Commission, and I do lots of work with Sally and Rebecca in regards to Connecticut History Day, hosted here at CCSU, and Danielle and Greg are both my former students.
Sam?
Samantha Tondro. I'm Director of Curriculum and Instruction at the Mohegan Tribe. I am Mohegan. I work with teachers across the state of Connecticut on PD, and I work with local schools to improve Indigenous programming.
Thank you. Nicole?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicole Jones. I am currently the Humanities and Arts Project Manager in the Academic Office here at the CSCE. Prior to that, I was an curriculum administrator and also an English language arts teacher.
Thanks, Nicole. Liz?
Yep, my name is Liz Devine. Hello, everybody. I retired social studies teacher from West Hartford and work now with Tracy on the hidden history, where we do research, public history research in West Hartford.
Thank you. Shaylin?
Hi, I'm Shaylin Ameo. I'm the Public Engagement Manager for Connecticut Landmarks, a statewide network of historic house museums. Public Engagement Manager just means I do marketing and interpretation and education.
Thanks. Bilal?
I'm Bilal Siku. I teach political science over at the University of Hartford. I also chair the board of Common Cause in Connecticut and also chair the board of the Connecticut Mirror.
Thank you, sir. Christine?
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I was a museum educator for almost 20 years, and now I'm doing freelance work for some historic sites in Hartford, the ancient burying ground in 1636, which is Center Church. And I've done a lot of professional development. I love working with curriculum, and I love history. Yay!
Thank you. Dr. Vernal?
I'm Fiona Vernal. I'm a professor in history and Africana studies at UConn.
Thank you. Becky Gomez?
Hi, everyone. My name is Becky Gomez, and I am the Director of Education and Recreation for the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation. I just started 6 months ago. Prior to that, I was the Director of Middle School History Curriculum for Uncommon Schools, which is a charter network here in the Northeast.
Okay. And Joshua Carter?
Wikisakamu, Nataswish Josh. Good day, all. My name is Joshua, and I've been blessed with the awesome, beautiful responsibility of being the executive director of the Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Research Center. Nice to meet you all.
And my name is Steve Armstrong. I work at the State Department of Ed doing social studies and am a past president of National Council for the Social Studies. So Cindy, if you could give everybody some background on the commission, just some background on how we got to where we are today, sort of. How's that for a nice general opening? But if you could just give us some background information here, it'd be great.
Yeah, so the commission was established last year on July 2nd of 2022. And since then we have been working to really get ourselves organized. We have 5 different subcommittees who are tasked with kind of doing the work for the commission. The education subcommittee, governance, community and organizational engagement, our inclusion, diversity, equity, and access subcommittee, and then a marketing and tourism subcommittee. So these 5 groups are going to be working together to really get the word out across the state about the 250th anniversary coming up, and working to help really reach out to people across the state and get people interested in the 250th. I threw in the chat the link to the commission's website. There we have a variety of information from kind of basics about the mission and the purpose. We're working on a values statement for the commission as we speak. There's also a listing of commission members, upcoming, well, past events, and once we have upcoming events, we'll have those on there as well. In addition to the subcommittees that I listed out before, we will also have an advisory council, which will be made up of or different organizations that are connected to the 250th, folks from local commissions and scholars from across the state to kind of help people find others who are interested in the 250th. And finally, we have some resources on here, links to our mailing lists and social media. And as of right now, we have some themes that we're hoping to really focus our commemoration here in Connecticut around. And pretty soon, I'll say in the next 2 to 3 weeks, we'll have a planning guide that we'll be releasing to help organizations across the state begin to think about planning their own events as we move forward. And a tiny little bit more. So I'm here as part of Connecticut Humanities because Connecticut Humanities will be administering the 250th. So although the commission is a part of the state, we'll be doing a lot of the work in the background to kind of coordinate with different organizations and the different commission members. And if at any point in time you have any questions, feel free to reach out.
Cindy, could I just ask you so that we're all totally on the same page here? From the commission's view, or how about from your view personally, what is the specific job of a subcommittee as you perceive it?
Yeah, I think. Of course, Becky. Sorry, I have a really hard time going back and forth between conversation and the chat. I'll admit to that. So I think that the subcommittees really will need to kind of define their own mission. In terms of the education subcommittee specifically, I think we're really hoping to make connections with schools and universities and understand how the commission can best provide resources and support to teachers and students throughout the state. And hopefully some of the folks on here can help gather resources that we can then work with you all to also share outwards. But also if through this process, we discover that there's work that we need to get somebody on staff to do. We're just here to really coordinate and figure out what that might be.
And would you say that work with museums, historical organizations, historical society, is that within our purview as well, or is that another group?
So I think it will overlap with another group, but I think in terms of educational programming that serves teachers and students in museums and historical sites, I think that makes a lot of sense within this group. I think public programming and exhibitions will probably not completely, there's some overlap, but be more of the organizational engagement subcommittee, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. So colleagues, does anyone have any questions before we start to talk of Cindy? Anything else that we need to know from her? Cindy, just so make everybody feel good, are we behind the other committees, or are we where we should be, or what's your thoughts?
You're on top of it.
Okay. In other words, we're the first subcommittee to meet. Is that what you're saying or no?
Second, but I'll say the first with major representation from lots of different organizations.
There you go. All right. So folks, what we really as Cindy reiterated, our job is to first off decide what do you think is a manageable task for this organization? What can we, and by the way, you notice we have folks from all kinds of different groups, teachers, professors, all kinds of folks. Would anybody want to start off? What do you think we could, and Debbie, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Hello, everybody. I apologize for joining you late. I am Deborah Schonder. I'm the state librarian at the State Library. It's good to be with you.
Great. How do you think that this group here can best serve America 250 in Connecticut? I mean, should we be focusing on working with, in your opinions, should we be focusing on schools? Should our tasks be broader tasks? Anybody want to start off with any thoughts on that?
Well, I wanted to say that I know a lot of the people here have done a lot of wonderful work already. So let's not reinvent the wheel. We already have a lot of wonderful, I've done curriculum on fundamental orders and things like that. So I think we have a lot of really great content. So I think a simple Google document where we can share all of that in one place is a good start as well.
Thank you, Christine. I mean, should our first focus be on say, public schools? Should our first focus be on public schools and universities? Anybody, any thoughts on this?
Hi, this is Danielle. It directly ties into the curriculum, especially for an elementary school and even at the high school level. So really easy ties to connect in for teachers.
I wonder if there's, and this might be too much, but I wonder if we think about, because as we're sitting here, I'm thinking about a couple of different ways we might go. Kind of to the point made that people are doing great things if this is a place where we organize that information to share publicly. But I also wonder with this public schools, if it's a matter of creating some resources or direction for them and trying to kind of get ties to local history, because we can't get to every public school, obviously, but if we created something that could be used in the classroom, that would perhaps link with our state history and try to get teachers to use local resources in terms of celebrating or commemorating the 250th.
Matt has his hand up.
Thanks, Steve. Hi, everybody. Sally and I, many moons ago, worked on the Connecticut Civil War Commemoration Commission, and we did that work over a 6-year period of time and did just an excuse me, an unbelievable number of events that were both, that they ran the gamut. It was popular history, it was museums, historical societies, it was our key historic sites in the state, it was public programming, but we also did a tremendous amount with school groups. And I think as the education, subcommittee, that's sort of one of the areas where we can really, especially with this particular group of people, where we can really do a lot of neat stuff and really shine, and then take whatever we're working on and have it intersect with the various other subcommittees and what they're doing. And I know there's quite a number of us here who have done a tremendous amount of work, not only with curriculum development, but with historical societies, museums, public history, and how all of these varying groups intersect with one another. And I think one of the most important things that we can do is really get the K-12 school systems engaged and get the students engaged. So Rebecca and Sally have been running Connecticut History Day for years and years and years, and the opportunity to have 250th Rev War, Declaration of Independence, and all that goes with it, all the various subtopics that go with that, to have that intersect with Connecticut history, to have that intersect with the various kinds of programming and the resources that so many of the historical societies and museums around our state and libraries, Deborah, that have our state, the kinds of stuff that we have. So one of the things that Steve and I have been talking about, and we'll be meeting with Jason Mancini about it at the end of the week. We're working with Tony Roy and Connecticut Council for Social Studies. Is, I know from doing the 150th of the Civil War that getting started early is key, and I think we're in a good place in that regard. But I'd love to, as I keep referring to it, as germinate some seeds early on. And so one of our ideas for that has been to start with a conference actually ahead of the curve. So start by doing a conference this next spring at CCSU and bring 250 to 300 middle school and high school students to the university and have a 2-day conference that deals with the concept of declarations of independence, not only the philosophical underpinnings of the US Declaration of Independence and the many difficulties of trying to aspire to the meaning of that document, but continually not quite getting there. I mean, that's the history of the United States in a lot of different ways. But then also looking at the international ramifications of the Declaration of Independence so that we can bring a true world history and world civilization component of looking at the philosophical underpinnings of the Declaration to the study of our students. And I think that's been one of the really important components of the conversations on the commission thus far regarding diversity and equity and inclusion, by looking at a lot of different groups and how they've wrestled with not only the history of the United States, but with the influence of the Declaration throughout the world. And I can think of, a dozen different peoples around the world, more off the top of my head, who have used the philosophical ideas of the Declaration to announce their own conception of self-government and their own ideas about human rights and freedom. So there's a lot of really cool places that we can go with that. And I would love to get this committee's support for that kind of a thing. And I know at the front end, you may think, well, geez, you're already going to do a conference that early? Yeah, because we want to get people. So by the time the 2026 rolls around, we've already had teachers and students working on this topic for a solid 18 months. So that when we get to 2026, they've already sort of, there's already a sort of a big tidal movement of where we can potentially go with these kinds of topics.
Tracy, yeah, please.
That sounds great, Matt. And I really support the idea of certainly of using local history. And it seems like so many of these, that one of the big ideas of America 250 is that the celebrations are local and the discussions are local. And I think I really think about student voice. So curriculum is one thing, what are we going to tell students? But I'm really interested in what students are going to tell us. So how do we get student voices going? Like Matt, you're talking about a conference in 2024. How do we get students talking about what equality means to them and what independence means to them? And I do think that I think it's Danielle is, Christine is right that there's a lot of stuff out there for curriculum. But how do we get, it's really important to me to know how students are interacting with these ideas, not just what can we teach them, sort of like what can they teach us? So how do we set up a sort of machinery to do that?
Shaylin, I might ask you that, or Sally that, who worked or Christine that. How do we get the student voice? How do we get the curriculum piece? Yes, but how do we get the student voice piece?
I just want to go back to what we just listened to. And I'm like a big idea kind of person, a big picture kind of person. And the frameworks are a great source for us to have a essential question, right? And so what we just heard was, what does freedom and equality mean to you? And we had the civic action piece in the frameworks. And so there are lots of tools that we have at our disposal. But I would like to propose, let's have an essential question. what does freedom and equality mean to you, or something similar, because I think that might, and that's broad enough. Luckily, the frameworks are broad enough that, students can delve into that on their own. But I completely agree. We need some student voice, maybe have a meeting where we invite students to be at one of these meetings, for example. We could have a Google form. So those are some of my thoughts.
I will say there are plans to have some kind of youth council that also informs what we're doing. We have a youth representative on the commission, Nick and Jelly, who is very excited about getting fellow students excited. We just haven't quite worked out the mechanics of that.
Steve, I have a question. Maybe you're the one to answer it. What's the end result? What's the intended result of the 250th celebration? Is at the end of that year, what would we see and feel good about if it were successful? At least in terms of our task.
Cindy, do you want to give the official answer to that, or do you want me to go? Why don't you give the official answer and I'll follow up on you? How about that?
Overall, the official answer is that we want to create opportunities for civic engagement, opportunities for all residents of Connecticut to feel represented and included, and really ensure that Connecticut will be remembered as a model for revolutionary civic participation that can inspire others with our passion, history, and capacity to create positive and sustainable change. So that is kind of the vision for what a successful 250th would be. And I'll throw that in the chat for everyone. Now, how exactly that translates to the education subcommittee's mission, I think, is a great topic for conversation.
Richard, you want to follow up on that or no?
Well, the reason I ask is that given what we're facing not only in Connecticut but nationally at both the K-12 as well as higher ed level, in terms of the right wing, the questioning of diversity and inclusion, and so the real ignorance about what our founding principles were really about in terms of the various freedoms and so on, and the abrogation of those so quickly, the book banning. That is, civic education in some sense has for a long time, in my view, and continues to be a relatively incoherent and shambolic stuff as a K through 12 curriculum. And it seems to me the 250 celebration is an opportunity for us to figure out a way of increasing a sustained, more coherent, more engaged learning of what we consider to be the fundamentals of democracy, whether it's through the lenses of Connecticut history, what have you, and that the more collective we can make that. So, for example, if all school systems were dedicated over the next several years to focus attention on some of the things that are now being questioned and teach it in a way in which people are better prepared to respond to the critics. What is it about civic education that is now missing that we might help people remedy so that when students are being engaged and we're getting student voices, there's at least something that there's some substance and common language and common parlance that allows the conversation to take place rather than pretty much what randomly takes place. So I'm looking for some coherence and something that threads through K through 12. I'm not even touching higher education at the moment. That's a whole different issue. But I mean, Guilford, for example, of all places, has been under the gun with lawsuits against the school board and book banning requests and CNN and others coming in and people trying to oust us from our school board. I mean, incredible propaganda, an amazing amount of ignorance. And teachers are frozen. People are silenced. And it just seems to me that people have not been inspired by our own history. And is there a way of celebrating it in a way in which people come away much more knowledgeable and valuing of the fundamentals that we take for granted? And that is an educational problem. I mean, John Dewey once said that democracy requires birth with every new generation, and education is its midwife. So that I'm arguing that we've not been a very good midwife systemically. And is there a way of actually making us more efficacious through the catalyst of the 250 celebration?
So through America 250, Richard, that we're using that as vehicle isn't the right term at all, but as a way to sort of a reaffirmation of American democracy.
Well, it's probably more than a reaffirmation, because reaffirmation implies people get it. I'm suggesting something more troubling, that people don't get it. And therefore it's eroding largely out of an inadequate education in the nature of democracy, at least as we Americans have defined it. There's plenty of content. The issue, the content is, we couldn't get the content done in more than years than we have. But the question is, how do we teach it in a way, and how do students get engaged with it in a way in which it's far more powerful than it has been, and far more uniformly, in the sense that we don't share a common language much with a common understanding of American history.
Fiona, I think you've been texting, and can you add to this?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, sure. I was responding in the chat.
I'm sorry.
I think, what did I say? Let me see if I can remember what I've been saying. So I think one thing I said was that is it possible to curate a list of so let me start over. Sorry. That the conference is I think is a fantastic idea. That Tracy's suggestion about including student voice in terms of student-led and students being agents in this is also really important. That we should think about how to get public libraries involved. So maybe we can curate a list of, a long list of common suggested readings, and maybe ask the libraries to convene reading groups locally around something that they select from the common list. And then Tracy said something about students interviewing adults, and I said maybe it could be structured as an intergenerational conversation where young people can ask their parents or grandparents or community members about what civic engagement and democracy means to them, as well as this anniversary. And I think that's where my typing trailed off. So I'm sorry to be having I didn't consider it a whole other conversation. I thought folks were reading. And the last thing I was typing was maybe some kind of like a marathon 24-hour, several iterations of a marathon read along like they did with Uncle Tom's Cabin. But that's not what we would be reading, right? Like maybe of some of these curated readings. So those were the things.
Thank you
That's
very
the last
much.
thing I was typing. I think I've said everything I was thinking.
Can I ask a framing
Deborah?
question? Just I
Sure.
want to make sure that I'm on the same page as everyone. And maybe this is a question for Cindy as well. My understanding, so in the museum and cultural space, the conversation around the 250th has been about not only the period of the Declaration, but then everything that has happened since then. So using the colonial period and the start of the country as just a starting point to discuss some of the themes that go past. And I want to make sure that that is the understanding for Connecticut's commission as well. I know that to kind of build on what Dick was saying, we have so much content that it almost is overwhelming to try and frame a response. And so I really like the thought to like have those framing questions that allow us to really to give people tools to approach any historical site, any historical topic, right? Like we want to make sure that we're having the same conversations, but we want the conversation to be a framework that's flexible, that can be applied in so many different ways because we have so many different versions of history that we're talking about, or versions isn't the right idea, but themes. We have so many different topics that we can talk about. So I just wanted to kind of ask that question and then give that comment.
So Cindy, is this on America 250 focusing on that period, or is there freedom to extend it to whatever period?
There is certainly freedom to extend it beyond the revolutionary period. So many of the things that have happened. Yeah. And Bilal has had his hand raised for a while. So if you'd like to
my apologies, sir. My apologies. Go ahead, you're up.
Not a problem. I think the hand blended in with my study, my books in the study. But I guess I'm also looking at this, from 10,000 feet, just in terms of what overall framing theme, may mean. And so for me, I think what's important is that it not only be a look backward, but it also be a look forward, right? I think, Richard sort of summarized, me as a political scientist, I pay attention to a lot of, the crisis that we are sort of living through right now and the challenges we have going forward, and also thinking about the work I do outside of the academy and some of the things that we sort of struggle with when it comes to issues like protecting democracy, protecting elections. And I think there is a real crisis here, right? It's pretty amazing at one level the country has really survived, in approaching 250 years, because it's not like we've got a lot of examples from history, that tried to do it quite this way, with all of the various tensions, the hypocrisies, and other issues that have come up over the years. And so for me, it's not just simply a question of renewal, but it's also a question of, when we look into the future, what are we sort of evolving? What are we moving to? And so, in a lot of the work I do outside of the academy, we talk about inclusive and multiracial democracy and what that means and what that looks like. And I think that is the challenge that we are struggling with in the moment, where we're seeing, at least the polls are suggesting declining support for democratic practice, procedures, ideas. And that's a real problem in our society. And so I think even, putting, documents in front of people really, will that sort of awaken that kind of, renewal and that real sort of desire to keep us on this journey. This is an incomplete project in that sense. And so that was the, one part of the 10,000, foot perspective for me. The other piece I think really is important for me, and I do this in my teaching, is that I don't, I really work towards, trying to encourage my students to be civically engaged. And so I think that has to be an important part. I mean, this doesn't work on its own, right? Otherwise, we leave it to the hands of oligarchs and plutocrats and others who will make many of the decisions for us. And so, in terms of what a democracy is supposed to mean, is ruled by the people. And so this idea of how do we renew not only a support and belief in the ideals and the practices, but also how do we engage people? How do we encourage them to to become involved? Because I think that is a part of what may keep the country around for another 250 years. The final thing is I'm sort of struggling with how this translates at the university level in terms of what that work looks like in the university. We don't have sort of a one type of curriculum that we all work from. I mean, I teach my American national government and campaign and elections class is probably different from the way many others teach. And then you've got historians who also, and sociologists and others. And so I think we should do some real thinking about what that looks like in terms of the kinds of things we do at the college level, university level, which I think will be different than the K through 12 system.
Please, Liz.
So I'm just going to follow up on that because I like that 10,000-foot idea, but I'm going to focus really more closely on public schools. So as a teacher, a former teacher, actually Steve was my department head for a long time. He knows that I did a lot of civic engagement. Tracy and I both have. I worry, and I think Richard mentioned this, I worry about public schools doing this and the teachers not getting the support they need. If we want to encourage and nurture civic engagement, then we have to encourage and support and nurture our teachers in the classroom. And I really think that there's got to be a time, I hope, where our public school teachers can get together to talk about and support each other on what kinds of civic engagements they want to do. Civic engagement is hard. You just can't say, oh, just go out and do this. People need support. They need ideas. They need to be inspired. So I don't want to see that left off to the side. I want to really make sure that we do that for our public school educators.
Sam or Becky, could I ask either, do you have from your perspectives anything on this? How do we engage students? And is are these broad themes of democracy, re-engaging democracy, et cetera, are those themes that you think would be good themes to proceed with?
Sam, if you have any thoughts, you can go first.
Yeah, when talking about Native nations, of course, there are governmental structures and political structures, past, present, and going into the future. I guess there's a challenging line of teaching those political structures while teaching structures in certain content. I can see where Native American studies can be taught. I'm a little challenged with thinking about, I guess, how that blends into what we're talking about now. Because when we talk about Native nations, we're always talking about, who is here first, getting our rights back, getting our land back, and there's a challenge in kind of what we've learned growing up in a democratic classroom. So while working on this project, we're also working on uncovering misconceptions and working with students on Indigenous identity and understanding. So we have a lot of really great, really challenging work ahead of us. I just don't know how I can support you yet, other than providing you museum space to learn in and Mohegan staff to help teach students and outreaches to schools and PD with teachers. But that's kind of where my brain's at the moment.
I would say that I second that. And as I'm sitting here, my former curriculum director hat on from a charter school network versus my current role in support of Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation, I'm not quite seeing exactly where I can jump in. One thing I will offer is actually in partnership with CT Humanities and Connecticut History Day, I do see some overlap here between the conversation Sam and you were in this morning with some other members of this call in regards to the focus on Indigenous history and Indigenous studies as part of Connecticut History Day. And so I wonder if those two can be combined in some way. I wouldn't want to take away from the focus specifically on Indigenous history. I want that to be front and center of that grant, and I think it will be. But I do think that there's some overlap here. I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but it's really funny. As I joined the call, I'm like, wait, I already met with Steve today and Sam twice, I think, and a bunch of other people. So many cool overlapping projects going on right now.
Thank you. Ruth?
Yeah, I just want to refer back to what somebody said earlier about the international ramifications of the declaration. So there are, and some of those that were brought up were positive. So there are positive and probably negative ramifications for some of the tribal nations. And in that area of, in that topic area, to include that kind of information, I think will be valuable to students.
Deborah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was going to say, in particular response to both Becky and Sam, I teach a course on race and politics. And, one way I frame that discussion is to talk about three sort of philosophical ideas that influence the sort of political system and, of our country. Certainly classical republicanism, classical liberalism, but I also talk about inegalitarianism. And this story of what has happened to Indigenous people has to be woven and is a part of. There are too many judicial decisions, political, that deal with Native people's issues, right? That has sort of shaped and constructed this country. And so I see both, there's a separate track, but I think there's also something that's so interwoven. And I don't think you can understand the country, many of the challenges we face right now as a country. You can't talk about, slavery is to me linked to the problem we have inherently with representation in the Senate and the House and the Electoral College. All of these things weave together. And I think, one of the things I experienced when teaching this to students is that they don't walk in with an understanding of those connections. And so my hope is that by the time they walk out, they understand. And again, this is my point about where we go in the future may mean we need to ask some challenging questions about these practices, these systems we have in place. And again, that's a real challenge because I think it's at the center of some of this conflict that goes on in our society about a Senate system, for example, that disproportionately represents small, mostly rural, mostly white, mostly conservative, states. And as a consequence of that, civil rights legislation and other pieces of legislation that move through often get stopped, in its tracks because of that system that's in place. So I'd like to have some tension around some of these discussions as we think about where do we go if we want, for example, to build a genuinely inclusive democracy, and what does that look like, and what does that maybe mean in terms of some of the questions we also ask. So it's not just a celebration of the past, but it's also getting us to think about the challenges that we are facing as we move into the future.
Debbie, Deborah, I was just going to ask you, where do you think that Connecticut, just sort of diverting the question a little bit, but where do you think the Connecticut libraries, or would local libraries, do you think, be places that would be allies in planning events and things?
I absolutely think so. I think that's one of the nice things about the network of libraries is there's one in every town. There's at least one in every town. And I think they will absolutely be places where programs can happen, whether or not that's something that the library itself is sponsoring or simply a place in which an organization or a group can take an event. At the state library, we have the connections with all of the public libraries or all of the academic libraries. Anybody that we would like to potentially partner with, maybe we can come up with a lectures, getting back to Matt's idea of like, if we are coming up with programming an idea, can we come up with a series or a place where we can connect and take that event to in different locations across the state? That I think libraries are one of the most trusted first thought of locations where people go to have those conversations, and librarians are trained to be available and also to ask difficult questions, to offer different perspectives, to provide that type of environment for people. And so I think that there's absolutely a place for libraries in this. And kind of getting back to Bilal's question or kind of comment, I really love that idea of having questions that we're presenting. I don't think we need to present answers to people. We can present information, we can present different perspectives, but I don't think that we should be presenting the end information or what we want people to learn about America 250 and about our history, but saying what are the questions that we think are important to ask, and providing a framework and a mechanism for those questions to be asked and answered in a whole variety of ways, I think is really what I would love to see. Kind of getting back to kind of, I think it was Shaylin talking a little earlier about what are the themes. I had an experience earlier today where somebody just literally just asked a question and it opened up something I had never thought of simply because they asked that question. And so I really like that approach to it, is how do we have, just looking at the size of this group today, we're not going to be able to provide all of those perspectives, and there are perspectives missing from our conversations today. But if we present those framing questions, that's a good, that to me seems like a really good way to go about it. So I answered your question, Stephen, and I answered another one. So that's my
Thank you
thought.
very much. Sally, any thoughts from your end on any of this?
Well, I'm thinking about a whole lot of things. I think there have been some really incredible ideas and possibilities thrown out today. I think the things that really stand out to me is the idea of questioning and the idea of youth voice. I think that that is really important. I think we're at such a strange time, it seems, in our democracy and in our nation's history, and anything we can do to turn more toward the future is going to be really important in this. And if we can listen to what students are thinking about all of these concepts that are arising around the 250th, I think it will be illuminating for older people. And I think it could help set us in some really interesting and positive directions as well. I think History Day can play a big role in this. We cannot, the themes every year are provided by National History Day, but we do find every year that the students in their projects turn toward issues like equality and freedom and equity. So we can probably offer workshops for teachers, for students that will help them think through some of these things and start raising their own questions. So I think there's a really important role here for History Day. And I also think with the new standards coming out, somebody had mentioned being supportive of the teachers, and that's something that always concerns me a lot. I heard a really upsetting story about a teacher today being sort of drummed out of her job in Oklahoma by people in education there because she shared a link or shared information about banned books with her students. So I really worry about teachers, and I think that there are going to be some really contentious discussions around some of the things, many of the things that people will be thinking about during this commemoration. So I think maybe looking at the standards and the frameworks and really thinking about how can we provide teachers with information and questions that will help them use the new standards in a very real and meaningful way to teach these to teach some of these concepts. So those are just some of the things that I'm thinking about. I think this has just been such a wonderful conversation.
I was going to ask Nicole, but Matt's got his hand up first, so go ahead, Matt.
I just wanted to mention that one of the things we did during the 150th in regards to what Deborah was talking about with the libraries is we partnered with the Connecticut Libraries Association, and we created actually a speakers list that was posted on our website that had a wide variety of topics and individuals who could go out and give talks on varying topics. And we actually got that grant funded. So not only did we provide, content folks, but we were also able to provide some support through a grant partnership so that various libraries and historical societies and other places could actually, bring in people to do those talks. So, I mean, maybe one of the things that we should all be thinking about, there's been a lot of good ideas that have been sort of brought out today, but maybe one of the things that we should be thinking about, all of us, for a little bit of homework, is jotting down some of the specific concepts and ideas that we would like to have engaged, so we can start developing a list and and figure out what some of the programming is that's related to all of that.
Nicole, thank you, Matt. Nicole, could I ask you, would you support, Nicole's my buddy at the state. We're colleagues, by the way, so that's why I feel comfortable throwing a question at her that she has no idea what's coming. But if we, do you think we'd be on the right course if we celebrated or commemorated America 250, but took this to the present day and talked about what I mean, is that a way to go, do you think?
I think based on my understanding right now, that would be a good way to go. As I heard someone else mention, the key things here are questioning and student voice, but I'm also hearing programming. And so when I think about programming, I'm thinking about hubs and really thinking about how we can curate learning experiences as well, and provide spaces for folks to indulge in this learning, whether that be at the libraries or the museums. But to answer your question, yes, Steve, I do think that could be a great place to go. But I also added my other 2 cents.
Cindy, I don't mean this as a joke. This isn't mean to be funny, but I want to ask you just to be sure. The commission has how much money to support programming at this point?
At this point, 0. But that will change as we move
See,
ahead.
that was said with humor, you realize that question. I just wanted to make sure, that's all.
Yep.
But you say in the future that may change?
I don't think we'll be getting state funds really to support programming, but CTH is looking to fundraise for re-granting to support programs for the 250th. So I can't say exactly what timeline we'll be looking at being able to fund bigger projects, but we do anticipate that changing in the next year.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Steve, I love the idea of learning hubs, and I was thinking about the same thing. One of our barriers I'd like to point out in Connecticut is that we think provincially. We think 160, 169 towns. And so I want to encourage everybody to think regionally. And also this summer is a great time to do professional development. You know, we've got lots of opportunities at museums, historic sites, colleges, whatever. And so I would also, all of these topics that we discussed today are topics for professional development. And I think that's a really great start for next summer to do professional development across the state. And all of these topics are really great and wonderful. And I love the idea of freedom and equality, inclusiveness, equity. So that's what I would propose. And, you know, I've done PD where teachers pay a little bit, or, you know, I think that funding is easily, we can find that somewhere.
Thank you. Bilal, please.
Yeah, just really quickly, because I noticed someone had put in the chat about the Dodd Center. And I'm not sure across other universities what they have in place, but I know at UHARD we have the Jody Rail Center. So there may be a way of thinking about partnering with some of those kinds of centers to the extent that they exist at other universities, which can maybe solve some of the financial part, because some of these centers have money that they could also use for programmatic work. And so there may be thoughtful to think about that. You know, if you do a panel at a university of, you know, women in politics in Connecticut, for example, then the Rail Center might be a good place to do something with them.
The question from Tracy, are you looking for private partnerships for raising money? Cindy, your answer?
Yes, so we're looking at corporate and foundations for funds for the 250th. So we'll keep everybody informed as we move forward with those efforts. And if you have any ideas, send them my way.
Yeah, there's a couple people on this call I know have had some experience with this that might be able to help you out. It seems to me that the common ground is, by the way, if we could encourage, whatever we want to call it, if we could encourage dialogues, questioning, whatever, and get some folks trained in that, that would be a very cool thing, I think. And it seems that the consensus, as I hear it, is we don't just do a commemoration of America 250. But that we look at America in through a larger lens than that. Is that the vibe that I'm getting? Is that, Richard, you said it eloquently. What was your mission for us back a few minutes ago? Richard, can you just restate what you were saying a few minutes ago?
Well, I think I'm just worried that we can come up with 1,000 activities, each one of which is worthwhile. But I'm more worried about the cumulative effect of that. Is there something we can do on purpose that may result in some lasting benefit? For example, we haven't even talked today about outside of school. I mean, what about all the people who live in Connecticut, particularly taxpayers who pay for the schools, who themselves could use a lot more understanding of American history and why, in fact, schools should change. And so I'm just trying to think about the ultimate impact as opposed to random output. So is there something purposeful we're trying to achieve? Because if we have thousands of people going to individual events and we're willing to live with that as the outcome, that's one thing. It's another thing to say, is there something larger and more intentional about that would leave us a better place at the end of this? So, I mean, we got a presidential election coming up, and if there's a catalyst for a conversation about democracy all around us that we couldn't take advantage of as themes and problems and challenges and reminders, that you couldn't get a better catalyst for appreciating the need for the things we're talking about than what's coming down the road in 18 months. So, I mean, we had a Supreme Court decision today that was fundamental, and 3 members of the Supreme Court were willing to essentially go back to a states' rights notion of governance. I mean, an absolute state rights governance. We're not very far from the edge, and so my concern is how we can have that conversation in a Connecticut, which is uniquely situated, being far more liberal than most places, where we can handle some of these conversations, but I don't see a lot of coherence in a state conversation at the moment. And I'm asking if we can contribute to that.
Anyone else want to add anything in at this point?
Really quick,
Bilal, please.
I put it in the chat, but I think also, the media, like the Mirror, the Current, and other sort of local radio media, I think can be a part of the role of public education. I mean, I think, if you look at the 2026 election, I know with the Mirror, we worked on, we didn't get it quite done that way, but a citizen's guide about, who's running for office and how to vote and all of those kinds of things gives us some of the tools we need for democratic practice in that sense.
I don't want to hold you folks up, but this was You realize, of course, that this was the first conversation of several. And this was a conversation that got, Cindy, there's a way that I could listen to this? Okay. But I think I'd be comfortable saying that we're gonna do America 250, but we're gonna do America in a broader context. And an American democracy in a broader context. Because I think what we have to figure out is the best mechanism to make it, as Richard says, a meaningful activity. But could I ask you this, if you have ideas that you think that you didn't say today or you want to say today, if you could email them to Cindy, or Cindy, is it better they email them to you or me?
Let's just do both. Make it easy.
Make it both. So email it to both of us. And if you would be willing to be in a small group that would try to make some, some sense out of all the fascinating ideas, if we could come up with some general principles that we came out of today's meeting, that would be very helpful. So if there's anybody that would be willing to take part in that activity, again, it would be taking all that we talked about today and trying to creating some general principles out of all we said today. Cindy, there's a question about, is there a way to get a list of the people that are here today?
Yeah, I'm happy to share that. And I will, as long as you don't have a problem with it, Steve, I'll share the list of folks who wanted to be here and couldn't make
That aren't here as well, right? But folks, I would agree with the theory that we want to sponsor activities, but that we're going to have to create guidelines in what are we in a big picture way want to accomplish with 250. I think that's something that we still, in a big picture way, what do we want to have rather than just an activity in Pomfret and an activity in Manchester or something like that. That's what we got to work on. So you know what, I think we'll probably, Cindy, when would it be necessary, or when would it be, I won't use the word necessary, desirable for this group to meet again?
I will say that the other committees so far have decided on a monthly schedule. I don't know. I know summer is tough, so if we want to say 6 weeks or so from now, sometime in
I was thinking of late July, early August for our next meeting. And I know there's vacations, et cetera, but we'll do what we can do. But is that all right? We'll meet again in late July, early August. We'll come up with some broad guiding principles on what we want to accomplish by then. Anybody that wants to help work on those, let us know. And the commission, I do know, by the way, that there are efforts made to raise money, so this won't be doing this. I would imagine in the total absence of funds. Although I'm sure the Connecticut State Library System has multitudes of dollars that they could donate to this cause, but
Oh, absolutely. Coming out the wazoo. Yeah.
right, I'm sure. As to all the state private and public and higher institutes of education have money coming out of whatever, right? But said with humor. Thank you for your time. We'll continue with this the next time we meet. And again, if you have any questions or comments, please email them to Cindy and myself.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
Have a great day.